It's time for Dirt Daily. Today's project, Ultimate Summer Camp Jeep is up on the lift. I did a video in the past where I showed that it had been sitting for a while and I put a new battery in it, and now is the next step. This thing has been parked for a while, and even before that it's been wheeled a bunch, and I need to do some general maintenance. Change the oil, probably clean the air filter, and also I have a transmission issue. It's not a problem, the transmission's working fine, but it's kind of an interference issue. So, first thing I did was I put it up on the lift, then I dove underneath with the transmission jack and I started removing all the skid plates. The skid plates bolt up into the frame rail, and so I need to get it down and out of the way so that then we can dive into the little transmission problem that I'm going to show you. Transmission problem is right here. Basically, this shifter arm for the transmission, you can see that? Well, that kisses the drive shaft under our extreme articulation. So when the front end is moving a whole bunch, it can swing the drive shaft up and kiss this, especially when that is in drive. This transmission is a 4L80, it's built by Gearstar. It does not have a reverse manual valve body. So on the shifter, it goes park, reverse, neutral, drive, and then you can shift it down into first gear. If I shift it all the way into first gear, this arm does not hit the drive shaft. Everything's fine. But if I'm in first gear and I want to get to reverse really quickly and the drive shaft is twisted up, I can't always get it into reverse. In fact, sometimes if I'm rock crawling in drive, and it twists up, it'll kick it out of drive into neutral. So I really want to get this arm closer to the transmission. Now there's a fix for this. This is basically the arm off of a 4L80 that doesn't use the neutral safety switch. The earlier ones had like this neutral safety switch. I think it's the earlier ones, maybe it's the later ones, have a neutral, this big old plastic plug thing out here. And when you use the arm that went with that plug, then it can interfere with things like this. I'm running an NP205 transfer case with a Magnum box, so the transfer case isn't really wide, so it keeps the drive shaft pretty close, which is nice for packaging, but it also can result in things like this. So I need to drain the transmission. I'm going to drain the engine at the same time, even though they're different fluids. I'm going to get it all done at once. Then I'm going to remove the pan, and I'm just going to let the thing drip into a catch pan, probably for an hour or two, and hopefully when I'm underneath here swapping out this little shaft, I'm not just bathing in ATF. Though I'm pretty sure I'll be covered in ATF by the end of this job. All right, let's get to work. The oil definitely needed changed. There's this challenge that people do where they try to pull out the drain plug and not get oil all over their hands. And I don't know. Just embrace the suck. Just get the oil everywhere. This is the old oil filter. It's an AMSOIL filter. It has the date May 2020 on it. That's terrible. That's like over 3 years since I changed the oil in this, which means I probably have not been really driving this thing that much, which is just miserable. Makes me miserable because I have such a cool Jeep and I don't take it out that much. But this is kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Selling off project cars, fixing the ones that I like to keep, so that hopefully I can go wheeling more and go out and see you guys on the trail instead of just via the World Wide Web. Here's the new oil filter that's going in there, AMSOIL. It's an EA. This says 15,000 mile change interval, which I'm pretty sure this doesn't have 15,000 miles on it total. So it's not that the oil has been running through for too many miles. If anything, it's been just sitting for too long, which I think is just as bad for a car. Sometimes driving a car a lot is better for it than sitting and not running it. So there's that. I'm not sure if I have some AMSOIL oil here or if I need to run and get some. I use a lot of different brands of oils. Mobil 1 on some vehicles, AMSOIL on some, Valvoline. I guess I just kind of figure out which one. Like my tow rig Dodge, that gets Rotella. And I know that there's actually a Cummins, I think Valvoline oil. There's an oil from Valvoline that Cummins recommends. I've been running Rotella in it from day one. So I just keep running the same thing. But I do try to put the date and or mileage of the vehicle on the filter whenever I put it in. And all that really does is make me feel bad when I see that it's like been on there forever. Oh, look, I have actually looked into getting a new drive shaft made that was a smaller diameter, but I think that this is a better fix is to actually drain and change that shaft on the transmission. Sorry about the backlight. Pew, 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 pew. Is this better? Front light? Oh, look at that. Whoa, super bright. Yeah, so this is what's going in. Let's find some oil, and we're gonna let that drain. We're gonna find a pan, we're gonna drain this pan. I dropped the skid plate. I removed the transmission pan. I disconnected the shifter. I also removed the transmission filter, which was right in here. I'm gonna put a brand new filter in. The fluid inside the transmission looked fine. The little magnetic drain plug did have a little bit of metal shavings on the end, but when I opened the pan, the inside of the pan was really clean. So that just tells me the drain plug was doing its job and collecting whatever little types of metal might be floating around in a brand new transmission. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. I wasn't having any issues with the transmission shifting. So the next step is going to be to get to the shaft that sticks through right here. And that's gonna have to wait for a second. I'm gonna let this kind of drip dry and round up all my tools. Here you can see how far the shifter shaft sticks out of the side of the transmission, which is right there. And also this is the drive shaft that's been getting hit by the shifter. This is the new shorter arm, and it's basically gonna sit like way back in there. So the shifter arm that pivots will be right back here against, like almost to the side of the case instead of sticking out about an inch, which should actually give us a ton of room when the thing is articulating. Now the first step is we have to remove this tensioner. This is what kind of puts tension on this keyway or this plate as it pivots as you shift. So we're gonna take these two bolts out first. As with any project, if you're doing something you haven't done before, take a bunch of pictures with your phone or your camera so that when you take it apart, you know exactly how to put it back together. We're gonna remove this bolt and this bolt. And set them aside somewhere safe and clean. Working on an automatic transmission, you really want to keep it as clean as possible. I am under a Jeep. This Jeep does go off-road, so it is dirty, but I'm trying my best to keep it as clean to do this project. This is the shaft that we're removing. You can see there's a nut inside there. We need to remove that nut. This has a flat landing on it, so you can grab it with a wrench, and then you will turn it and undo this nut right here. Then this whole thing will slide out, and then you'll slide the new one right back in. This is the rod that we're trying to remove. The end of it's threaded, and there's a nut. But there's also, right inside here by my fingertip, there is a little tiny pin, kind of like a nail or a little pin that plugs into the transmission case. Let me see if I can zoom in here. You can see it right there. So this piece of metal needs to be bent out of the way, and then that pin needs to be pulled out. So then this will slide out and that nut will come off. Now this piece of metal, it's like a gasket, metal gasket, and it needs to be bent down, but it's not gonna hurt anything. It just needs to kind of be bent out of the way so you can get some pliers onto the head of that nail and wrestle it out of there. I don't know if this makes sense to you, but that little tiny nub right there at the end of my fingernail is the pin that needs to come out. Well, last night did not go as planned, or I should say, the removal of the little tiny pin did not go as planned. I'm going to try and explain it on this piece of cardboard because it's easier to understand, I think. So this is the rod that I'm trying to change. This is that castle nut that threads onto the rod. These are the threads. And then it goes into the aluminum, and there's kind of a notch in the rod. And then there's a hole next to that notch. And when the pin goes up inside there, it locks the rod from falling out, from sliding out. Also, the pin is designed like this. There's a head of the pin, and then it goes up a little bit, and then it's knurled, and then it comes back in, and it goes up like that. And this is designed to go up into the aluminum and lock into that groove in the shaft. The problem was that the pin in my transmission had basically been broken right here. Probably in removal before it was rebuilt or some reason. So I only had this much of the pin, and it was basically sticking out like that little tiny bit below the line. So this little tiny bit was all that was sticking out, making it really hard for me to grab that. And I need to pull this pin out. You can see here's the gnarled section. So it was locked into the aluminum. It wasn't falling out, but it wasn't coming out so that I could pull out the shaft. This is the shifter shaft, and this is the shifter shaft locking pin. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is what, I basically had 2/3 of the pin. So it got pretty rough. I basically had to come in and chisel away at the aluminum around this shaft until it revealed enough of the shaft that I could grab it. So these are my pliers. Gosh, those are terrible looking pliers. And once I was able to grab that little tiny piece of shaft, I could pull it out. Which now this aluminum is all smashed up. And on top of that, I was trying to protect and keep all the shavings from the aluminum from getting into the transmission. It was pretty butch, to say the least, but I got it out. And this is the shaft. This is all that's left. You can just probably barely see that, I don't even know if it'll focus on it. The end of it is knurled. So, turns out you can actually order this piece. I mean, you can order it. I don't know that you can get it, because everything that I tried to find was back ordered. It's like a $6 little locking pin. So I called my local transmission shop and was like, do you have one of these that's come out of another 4L80 that still has the head on it so that I can get it out later? And he was like, well, maybe. Come by. Let me show you what I got. This is a finishing nail. This is going to do the exact same job. It has a bend on the end. so that when it sticks up in here, it won't go in too far. There was that piece of metal gasket that I bent out of the way. I'm gonna bend that back up so that this won't fall out. It'll actually hold it up against there. I'm gonna put a little tiny arc bend right here so that when it gets hammered up in there, tapped up in there, it has basically like a knurl. It has kind of, it'll just be arced enough so that it will wedge into the hole and hold that shaft in. This is, you know, when you're working on a project and you think everything's going smooth, there's the reckoning, which basically wrecks all of your progress. This was the reckoning. There's other words that people use for it. Because I like to make my show kid-friendly, I'm not going to use those words. So we're going to go with the reckoning, because it wrecked my progress, and it wrecked my evening, and it made me really upset and mad. But I got it out, and oh, how did I get it out? So what I did was I butchered all of that aluminum out of the way, and then I put some vice grips, needle nose vice grips on there, and they were holding onto that shaft by like 1/8 of an inch, just barely grabbing it. And then I put a washer. Let me actually show you. That is the tool. There, I put the pin back in it to show you. Like, it just barely had a bite on it. And I put this washer on the end so that when it was wedged up in there, I could take this little baby ball peen hammer and just hammer it on enough until that thing came out of the hole. You can't give up. You got to just keep fighting it, and eventually the pin will come out. The reckoning will be over, and you can get back to work. But that thing right there, this whole project of swapping that little shaft in that transmission, that's like a 40-minute, hour-long, maybe an hour and a half long if you consider pulling the skid plates, dropping the pan, putting in the new filter, refilling it, swapping everything. Maybe an hour and a half. That thing made it all day because of that pin. So now we get to put it back together. But you can order this part. There's actually a AC Delco General Motors part number for it. I found it. I wasn't able to get it in time, back ordered. So I'm gonna use this finishing nail and put my Jeep back together. So we can get on to the next thing. So the next step is to remove this shaft. Up in there is the spot that I had to butcher in order to get that pin out. Next, you want to loosen the 15mm castle nut. That just, once that backs off. Oh, and remember how I said I would be getting a bath of ATF? It's still dripping. It's a day later, and it's still dripping. So this just has to kind of walk off of that old shaft. This is the new shaft. Right there is the little tiny notch in the shaft that pin will lock it into place. Stop dripping on me, transmission. All right. This shaft backs out, and there is a seal in the side of the transmission, and this should just slide out through it. The reckoning is still here. This is the new shaft that is going into the transmission, and you can see here, this is where that nail or pin will hold it in place. And then if I turn it, you can see there's a flat side landing on either side of the threads. Well, as it turns out, the bracket that this goes into was just the tiniest little bit too tight on that. So I had to grab a file and massage this. So this is what I'm learning. These short shafts are from the earlier transmissions. The longer shaft is for the later transmission that has a neutral safety switch bracket thing that mounts on the outside if you have that. There is an aftermarket rod that changes from the long shaft to the short shaft. And I don't know if it is actually machined different or if this one and this shifter detent lever are just kind of like worn different from all the years. But I hit it with a file and now it slides in there like it's supposed to. So now I think I can finally assemble all of this and get the transmission back together the way it's supposed to. It's been a fight, but it's coming together. I got that shaft in, got the nut on, the castle nut. I put that little nail in. I put that piece of gasket that was peeled down. I put that back up, and that actually helps lock the nail in place. I put the spring-loaded panel back on. So we're kind of getting to the point where all I have to do is put the filter back in, and then I think I can put the pan on it, and hopefully I can stop taking a bath in ATF because I can stop working underneath this thing and it can stop dripping all over my face. I put the new little gasket into the case. I'm going to slide the new filter back in. Even though this transmission uses a kind of a deep pan, the pan is actually fluted for cooling, so it doesn't use a deep pan filter. It actually, you just fill it up with more fluid up to there. So it's the stock depth dipstick and the stock depth filter. Let's grab that pan and put it back on here. Here you can see that pan. You can see those flutes. Those actually run through the pan. There's tubes inside here to help cool the fluid just from airflow. Also, it uses an O-ring style gasket, so it's a reusable gasket. And you know what I'm going to do before I put that up there? I'm going to grab a towel, make sure the whole seal surface is clean. Mr. Pan. Oh, I got it backwards. There's a temperature sensor on the passenger front. Let's see if we can get one bolt through the gasket started here. And then another bolt through the gasket started in the front. I'm going to go and get every one of these bolts finger started because the last thing I need is another reckoning, like a cross-threaded bolt. Also, the bracket for the shifter goes right here, and I need to make sure that this is all happy and in the correct direction. It's coming together. Man, this has been a fight. It's also been kind of hot in the shop. So this is our situation. The pan is on. The shifter cable is hooked back up. It's tight up against, I kind of flipped it around on this bracket. The arm is back in place. The cable's hooked back up. I had to modify the cable just a little bit because everything was just a little bit shorter and everything was a little bit tighter. But I think we have more clearance between this arm and the drive shaft. This arm's kind of a little bit custom, I would say, a little bit bent and twisted. So I ordered a replacement arm just to have with me. But overall, I think it's time to lower the Jeep, fill the transmission up with ATF, fill the engine up with motor oil, and make sure the engine starts and runs and has oil pressure again, which it should. Nothing's really changed other than a new filter. And make sure that the transmission goes in and out of gear so that we can go rock crawling. I think we got more clearance, which is what we wanted. It was a lot of work. Things didn't go as planned. The simple little 40-minute job turned into 2 days, but that's how it goes sometimes. All right, let's fill this thing up, make sure we can still go four-wheeling. All right, moving right along. I filled up the transmission with ATF. This is the little adapter on the end of the funnel that you need to use because we have a low-car dipstick on this. I don't know that I would do that again. It's like a smaller diameter, so it takes longer. It seems to make a bigger mess when you are filling up the transmission. 99% of the time, you don't care. When you have to fill it up, you have to make sure you have that little adapter. You can't just use a basic transmission funnel. For ATF, I used AMSOIL. I had some, and it's good stuff. It's full synthetic. I also changed the oil with Mobil 1. The engine, it's a GM crate engine. It's an LSA, so it's a supercharged 6.2 liter all aluminum block V8, 500 some horsepower. It's basically the same engine that's in a Cadillac CTS-V. This is the engine that was in the Alabama Army truck, which was an Army truck I built on dirt every day years and years ago. And I eventually pulled it out and put it in here. Would I do that again? It's a lot of fun having a supercharged engine. I think you could have just as much fun with an LS3, a basic GM crate engine, or even a Chevy 6-liter. You wouldn't have as much horsepower, but if you're doing rock crawling and not needing full throttle assaults on things, I think you would be fine with a little less horsepower. I did charge the air filter. I cleaned it and sprayed some new K&N oil on it. I used AMSOIL coolant on the radiator, and I topped off the intercooler system for that supercharger, which is there's like a little radiator in front of the main radiator, and then there's an electric pump, and that pumps it through the intake and cools the air charge from the supercharger. So everything is coming together. I think it's time to, I'm gonna double check power steering fluid, and then we're gonna fire this thing up and see if the tires turn. Hopefully, cross your fingers, I didn't put anything together wrong on that transmission. Just going to leave it up on the lift, start it up, make sure our transmission goes into gear. Always buckle up. Even if you are not going for a drive, it's better to buckle up. Like say this thing, I don't know, rattles off the arm of the lift and I get knocked unconscious and it peels out into the corner. At least it's better than getting run over. Okay, let's start up. We are only in rear-wheel drive. That's a good sign. We're getting all the gears and we're getting neutral. Success. Transmission goes into gear, tires turn. There's a little bit of, I think I need to do a little bit of adjustment on the cable, but I pretty stoked. We have clearance for the shifter arm. We changed the oil. We cleaned and changed the air filter, or didn't change it, cleaned it, re-oiled it, put it back in. We're getting that much closer to having the Ultimate Summer Camp Jeep back on the trail. Pretty stoked. We still got a lot more stuff to do to it, so tune in again for some more updates. That's it for this Dirt Daily. We'll see you guys next time. Woohoo! Let's put the skid plates back on.